All right, I'd like to do a review now for the final exam. And on the final exam, you will be responsible for the lectures over theme and variation, and then over sonatina and sonata allegro. So I'll have some questions having to do with things like basic theme and variation techniques in the Baroque era that I talked about from the textbook. So looking at those different, there were 4 different types. So be sure you go back over that. And also be able to talk about the theme and variation in the classical period. So a typical example by Mozart or Haydn or Beethoven, you can look for several different things. So go over that lecture on classical theme and variation. We looked at the first movement of Kochel 331 of Mozart, which was a set of 6 variations, and that was a good example of things that you can expect to find. And then we looked at the last movement of Beethoven Opus 109, and that is a much more complex handling of theme and variation form. And so for that, I gave you a worksheet. And so you went through that in detail, and you analyzed variations 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I will have some questions that are taken directly from that worksheet for you. And so you want to go over the video then where I explain the analysis of those variations in that great movement. So be sure that you are clear about all of that, the placement of that German 6th chord and the different ways of creating contrast from one variation to the next. And so you should know terms like invertible counterpoint, and there was a fugal variation in there, number 5. Anyway, just look over that worksheet on Opus 109, and I'll have some questions on that. So you should be able to talk a little bit about the background of sonata allegro form, and so I talked about some historical things in the Baroque era. It is something that develops from the basic concept of tonal architecture, which led to the binary form constructions of dance movements during the Baroque, and then specifically rounded binary form, and even the concept of ABA ternary, which is associated in the Baroque with the da capo aria. And so just go over those points that I bring up in the video on the historical background of sonata allegro form, and I will have something about that for you. And then you just want to be able to do some analysis, and I'll have a couple of movements for you to look at. And so they will be either theme and variation, or sonatina, or sonata allegro. So I'm not going to give you something from earlier in the semester on song forms, although you should know, if I ask you what is the song form of the A theme, then, and if it's in incipient 3-part song form, then I would expect you to be able to identify it. So I'll ask it in that kind of context. This final exam is going to focus on those 3 forms, and primarily theme and variation, sonata allegro. So if you have questions, just let me know, and study hard for the final.